Picture this for a moment. 540 million years ago, something extraordinary happened on Earth. In what scientists call the Cambrian explosion, creatures suddenly began developing eyes. Not just simple light sensors, but sophisticated image-forming eyes that could see shapes, movement, predators approaching from across ancient seas. And with those eyes came something unprecedented in the history of our planet. For the first time, the universe could see itself. Welcome to this quiet exploration of one of the most profound questions we can ask. How did consciousness begin? When did the cosmos first become aware of its own existence? I'm here to guide you through this gentle journey into the deepest mystery of existence itself, where neuroscience meets philosophy, where evolution encounters the hard problem of awareness, and where we'll discover that the story of consciousness is also the story of the universe waking up. As you settle in, perhaps with a warm drink or in your favorite contemplative space, know that what we're about to explore together has puzzled the greatest minds in human history. From ancient philosophers to modern neuroscientists, from quantum physicists to consciousness researchers, we're all trying to understand the same fundamental mystery. How did a universe of swirling particles and energy fields give birth to the inner world of experience, to the feeling of being you, looking out through your eyes at this very moment? Tonight, we'll journey through nearly 4 billion years of evolution, following the thread of awareness as it weaves through the fabric of life itself. We'll explore the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, a landmark document that forever changed how science views the minds of other creatures. We'll dive into the Cambrian explosion and discover how the evolution of sight may have triggered the first true awakening of consciousness on Earth. And we'll venture into the controversial territory of quantum consciousness theories, where some researchers suggest that awareness itself might be woven into the fundamental structure of reality. But this isn't just a story about the distant past or abstract scientific theories. This is about you, about the miracle of your own awareness, about how the universe became capable of contemplating itself through your very thoughts. As we explore these ideas together, you might find yourself noticing the strange loop of consciousness itself. Here you are, a collection of atoms that were forged in the hearts of dying stars, somehow arranged in such a way that they can ponder their own existence. Let's begin our story in the deep time before consciousness, in an era when Earth was populated by creatures that could sense but could not truly see. Imagine, if you will, a world 3 billion years ago. Life existed, yes, but it was a fundamentally different kind of existence than anything we might recognize today. Single-celled organisms drifted through primordial oceans, responding to chemical gradients, moving toward nutrients away from toxins. They could detect light and darkness, warmth and cold, but they experienced none of it in the way we understand experience. These early life forms possessed what scientists call mechanistic sensing. They could respond to their environment, but there was no inner theatre where these responses played out, no subjective feeling of what it was like to encounter warmth or flee from danger. It was life, but life without an observer, existence without experience. The universe was filled with information processing, but there was no one home to witness it. For nearly 3 billion years, this was the state of affairs on Earth. Life grew more complex, yes. Cells learned to cooperate, forming the first multicellular organisms. They developed specialized functions, primitive nervous systems that could coordinate responses across larger bodies. But still, there was something missing, something that wouldn't arrive for eons yet to come. Take a moment to really contemplate this vast stretch of time. 3 billion years of life without consciousness as we know it. To put this in perspective, if the entire history of life on Earth were compressed into a single year, consciousness, as we're exploring it, wouldn't appear until sometime in November. For most of life's story, the universe was essentially sleepwalking through its own evolution. During this immense period, evolution was busy laying the groundwork for what was to come. The basic machinery of life was being perfected. Cells learned to harvest energy from sunlight, to process complex chemicals, to reproduce with startling fidelity. Neural networks began to emerge, first as simple connections between cells, then as increasingly sophisticated information processing systems. But even these early nervous systems, remarkable as they were, lacked something crucial. They could coordinate behavior, yes. They could help an organism navigate its environment more effectively. But they didn't create an inner world of experience. There was no felt sense of being that organism, no subjective perspective from which the world was perceived and interpreted. This absence of subjective experience during life's early chapters raises profound questions that consciousness researchers grapple with today. What exactly is the difference between sophisticated information processing and genuine awareness? Can we draw a clear line between systems that merely respond to their environment and those that actually experience it? These questions become even more intriguing when we consider that some theories suggest consciousness might be far more fundamental than we typically assume. Everything changed around 540 million years ago. In what paleontologists call the Cambrian explosion, life on Earth underwent the most dramatic transformation in its entire history. In a relatively brief span of geological time, perhaps 20 million years, nearly every major group of animals that would ever exist made their first appearance in the fossil record. But this wasn't just an explosion of new body forms and ecological strategies. According to some researchers, this was the moment when consciousness first flickered into existence on our planet. The key to understanding this transformation lies in a deceptively simple evolutionary innovation. Eyes, not the primitive light-sensitive patches that had existed before, but true image-forming eyes capable of creating detailed pictures of the world. Multiple lineages of animals independently evolved sophisticated visual systems during this period, suggesting that the ability to see clearly conferred such enormous survival advantages that it was worth the considerable metabolic cost of building and maintaining complex eyes. Dr. Andrew Parker, a researcher who has studied this period extensively, proposed what he calls the light switch hypothesis. According to this idea, the evolution of image-forming eyes was the trigger that set off the entire Cambrian explosion. Suddenly, predators could see their prey clearly across considerable distances. Prey animals could spot predators approaching and take evasive action. The entire dynamic of life on Earth shifted from a world of chemical signals and touch to one of sight and rapid response. But here's where the story becomes truly fascinating from a consciousness perspective. Vision isn't just about detecting light, it's about constructing an internal model of the external world. When you look around the room where you're listening to this, your brain isn't simply recording photons like a camera. It's actively building a three-dimensional representation of space, identifying objects, predicting movements, creating what researchers call a virtual reality of your surroundings. This capacity for spatial modeling, for creating detailed internal maps of the external world, may represent the crucial step in the evolution of consciousness. For the first time in Earth's history, organisms weren't just responding to immediate stimuli. They were constructing rich, detailed models of their environment, complete with objects persisting through time, spatial relationships, and the prediction of future states. Consider what this means. A Cambrian predator tracking its prey had to maintain an internal representation of where the prey was, where it was going, where it might go next. This requires a kind of mental simulation, a virtual world inside the organism's nervous system where different scenarios could be played out. And perhaps most remarkably, it requires a perspective, a point of view from which this internal world is observed and evaluated. As you listen to this, you might notice your own visual system at work. Perhaps you're looking at a wall, but your brain is automatically filling in the space behind objects, predicting what would be revealed if you moved your head slightly. You're experiencing the sophisticated machinery of spatial consciousness that may have first emerged in those ancient Cambrian seas. The fossil record from this period tells a remarkable story of escalation. As vision became widespread, organisms developed increasingly elaborate defensive strategies. Shells, spines, armour plating, all the hard parts that preserve so well in fossils. This wasn't just an arms race of physical capabilities. It was an arms race of minds, of increasingly sophisticated internal models, of growing awareness. But vision alone wasn't the complete picture. The Cambrian explosion also saw the emergence of complex behaviours that suggest rich inner lives, evidence of social cooperation, tool use, elaborate mating displays. These behaviours hint at organisms that weren't just responding to immediate stimuli, but planning, anticipating, perhaps even experiencing something analogous to what we call emotions. The neurobiological evidence supports this picture of Cambrian consciousness. The basic brain architecture that we see in all vertebrates today, including the hierarchical processing systems that neuroscientists believe are essential for conscious experience, appears to have been established during this period. The forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain organisation that characterises conscious creatures was already present in the earliest vertebrate fossils from around 520 million years ago. To understand how consciousness emerged during this critical period, we need to delve into the neurobiological foundations that make awareness possible. Modern neuroscience has identified several key features that appear to be essential for conscious experience, and remarkably, evidence suggests that all of these features were present in early vertebrates. The first requirement is what researchers call hierarchical processing. Conscious brains don't just detect sensory information, they process it through multiple levels, each adding increasing complexity and integration. Raw sensory data comes in through receptors, gets processed into basic features like edges and movements, then into objects and spatial relationships, and finally into coherent, meaningful representations of the world. This hierarchical organisation allows for something crucial that simple nervous systems lack: the ability to separate sensation from response. In a primitive reflex system, a stimulus directly triggers a response. Touch something hot, pull your hand away. But in a hierarchically organised conscious system, sensory information gets processed through multiple stages, creating a space between stimulus and response where evaluation, choice, and subjective experience can emerge. The second essential feature is what neuroscientists call global integration. For consciousness to exist, information processed in different parts of the brain needs to be brought together into a unified, coherent experience. When you look at a red apple, different brain regions process its colour, shape, texture, and location. But somehow all of this distributed processing gets integrated into a single, unified percept of red apple. This integration appears to be mediated by what researchers call the reticular formation, a network of neurons that extends throughout the brainstem and helps coordinate activity across different brain regions. This system, which is essential for attention and awareness, was already present in the earliest vertebrates, suggesting that the capacity for unified conscious experience emerged very early in vertebrate evolution. The third crucial component is what we might call temporal binding. Conscious experience isn't just a series of disconnected snapshots. It has a flowing, continuous quality where past, present, and anticipated future are woven together into a coherent stream. This requires sophisticated memory systems that can maintain information across time and integrate it with incoming sensory data. Evidence suggests that these memory-dependent processing systems were also emerging during the Cambrian period. The ability to learn from experience, to modify behaviour based on past events, to anticipate future situations based on current circumstances, all of these capacities that we associate with conscious awareness appear to have deep evolutionary roots. As you reflect on your own experience right now, you might notice how all of these systems are working together. Information from your senses is being processed hierarchically, integrated into a unified experience, and woven together with memories and expectations into the continuous stream of awareness that constitutes your subjective experience of this moment. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this emerging consciousness was its capacity for what philosophers call intentionality. Conscious states aren't just internal experiences, they're about something. They represent aspects of the world. They point beyond themselves to objects and relationships in the environment. When a Cambrian predator saw its prey, its visual experience wasn't just an internal state. It was an experience of something specific in the external world. This capacity for representation, for creating internal states that refer to external realities, may be the most fundamental aspect of consciousness. It's what allows conscious beings to transcend the immediate, here and now, to think about distant places and future possibilities, to imagine scenarios that don't yet exist but might come to be. The evolutionary advantages of this kind of representational consciousness become clear when we consider the complex behaviours that began emerging during the Cambrian period. Navigation across large distances, coordination of group activities, elaborate mating rituals, all of these behaviours suggest organisms that could maintain complex internal models of their world and use those models to plan and execute sophisticated strategies. In our next chapter, we'll explore how this early consciousness continued to evolve and diversify, eventually giving rise to the extraordinary variety of aware beings that populate our planet today. But for now, take a moment to appreciate the profound transformation we've just explored. In the space of a few million years, the universe acquired something it had never possessed before: eyes to see, minds to understand, and perhaps most remarkably of all, the capacity for subjective experience, for there being something it is like to be alive and aware in this strange and wonderful cosmos. As we continue this journey together, remember that the consciousness we're exploring isn't just an abstract scientific concept. It's the very medium through which you're experiencing these ideas, the inner light by which you're illuminating these thoughts, the mysterious awareness that makes it possible for the universe to contemplate its own awakening. In the next part of our exploration, we'll discover how this ancient awakening led to the incredible diversity of conscious experiences we see today, and we'll venture into some of the most controversial and fascinating theories about what consciousness might ultimately be. Or, if you're curious about how this story of cosmic awakening connects to the nature of your own mind, you might find our exploration, "What if consciousness controls the brain?" particularly intriguing. Until then, rest in the wonder of your own awareness, this ancient gift that first emerged in Cambrian seas and now illuminates your understanding of these very words. As consciousness took root in those Cambrian seas, something remarkable began to unfold. What started as a single evolutionary innovation, the capacity for subjective experience, began branching into an extraordinary diversity of ways of being aware. If you pause for a moment and really consider the world around you, you'll realize you're surrounded by minds, each experiencing reality in ways both familiar and utterly alien to your own. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed by a prominent group of neuroscientists in 2012, marked a pivotal moment in our understanding of this diversity. For too long, science had operated under the assumption that consciousness was uniquely human, or at best limited to a handful of species closely related to us. But the evidence had been mounting for decades that awareness extends far deeper into the tree of life than we ever imagined. The declaration was revolutionary in its simplicity. It stated that the neurobiological substrates that generate consciousness in humans are not unique to our species. The same basic brain architectures, the same patterns of neural integration, the same capacity for subjective experience that we recognize in ourselves exist across the animal kingdom. From the tiniest mammals to the largest whales, from birds navigating vast distances to octopuses solving complex puzzles, consciousness appears to be not the exception, but the rule. Consider the implications of this for a moment. When you watch a bird outside your window, you're not observing a biological machine following predetermined programs. You're witnessing another conscious being with its own subjective experience of the world, its own perspective on the morning light, its own felt sense of being alive in this moment. There's something it's like to be that bird, some inner theatre where its experience of flight, hunger, alarm, and contentment plays out. The evidence for this widespread consciousness comes from multiple converging lines of research. Behavioural studies reveal complex problem-solving abilities, emotional responses, and social behaviours that suggest rich inner lives. Neurobiological research shows that the brain structures associated with consciousness in humans, the hierarchical processing systems, the integration networks, the attention mechanisms, are present across vertebrate species and even in some invertebrates. But perhaps most compelling are the studies of metacognition, the capacity to think about thinking. Researchers have discovered that many animals demonstrate awareness of their own knowledge states. They can assess the reliability of their own memories, choose when to seek additional information, and modify their behaviour based on their confidence in their own perceptions. This suggests not just consciousness, but self-aware consciousness, minds that can reflect on their own mental processes. Take dolphins, for instance. These remarkable creatures pass the mirror self-recognition test, demonstrating that they can recognise themselves as distinct individuals. But their self-awareness goes far deeper than simple self-recognition. Dolphins have been observed teaching complex behaviours to their offspring, coordinating elaborate hunting strategies and engaging in what can only be described as play. They create bubble rings underwater, seemingly for no purpose other than the joy of creation and observation. Or consider the great apes, our closest evolutionary relatives. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans all show evidence of sophisticated theory of mind. The ability to understand that other individuals have their own beliefs, desires, and intentions. They engage in deception, cooperation, and reconciliation in ways that suggest they're modelling the mental states of others, imagining what it might be like to be in someone else's position. Even more surprising is the emerging evidence for consciousness in creatures whose brains are organised very differently from our own. Octopuses, for example, have evolved complex nervous systems independently from vertebrates. Their brains are distributed throughout their bodies with significant neural processing occurring in their arms, and yet they demonstrate remarkable problem-solving abilities, use tools, show individual personalities, and even appear to dream, their skin cycling through colours and patterns during what seems to be REM-like sleep. The diversity of conscious experience extends beyond individual minds to collective forms of awareness. Consider a flock of starlings moving in perfect coordination through the sky, each bird responding to its immediate neighbours in ways that create breathtakingly beautiful, emergent patterns. Or a colony of ants solving complex navigation problems through the collective processing of information, no single ant understanding the full picture, yet the colony as a whole displaying what can only be called intelligent behaviour. These examples raise profound questions about the boundaries of consciousness. Where does individual awareness end and collective intelligence begin? Is consciousness necessarily confined to single brains, or might it emerge from the interactions between minds? These questions become even more intriguing when we consider human consciousness itself, which some researchers argue emerges not from isolated individual brains, but from the complex interactions between our neural networks and the social and cultural environments in which we're embedded. As you reflect on your own consciousness right now, notice how it feels both utterly private and deeply connected to the world around you. Your awareness is shaped by language, culture, relationships, all the ways that other minds have influenced and continue to influence your own. Perhaps consciousness has always been, in some sense, a collective phenomenon, individual minds arising from and participating in larger patterns of awareness that span communities, ecosystems, and ultimately the entire biosphere. But now we encounter one of the deepest mysteries in all of science and philosophy. Even as we map the neural correlates of consciousness, even as we identify the brain structures and processes associated with awareness, we still face what philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. How does subjective experience arise from objective physical processes? How does the wet 3-pound organ in your skull give rise to the felt sense of being you? This question cuts to the very heart of our understanding of reality itself. We can explain, in remarkable detail, how brains process information. We can trace the pathways by which sensory data becomes integrated into coherent representations. We can identify the neural signatures of attention, memory, decision-making, and countless other cognitive functions. But when it comes to explaining why any of this should feel like anything at all, why there should be an inner world of subjective experience accompanying these information processing activities, science finds itself at a loss. Colin McGinn, another philosopher who has grappled extensively with this problem, put it beautifully when he wrote about the mystery of how the water of the physical brain is turned into the wine of consciousness. There seems to be an unbridgeable explanatory gap between the objective, third-person description of neural activity and the subjective, first-person reality of conscious experience. Take a moment to consider your own experience right now. You can describe what's happening in your brain as you listen to these words. Neurons are firing in patterns, neurotransmitters are being released, electrical signals are propagating through neural networks, but none of that description captures what it's actually like to be you, experiencing these thoughts, feeling the particular quality of your attention as it focuses on these ideas, the specific texture of your consciousness as it unfolds moment by moment. This explanatory gap becomes even more puzzling when we consider the evolutionary timeline we've been exploring. If consciousness emerged gradually through natural selection, as the evidence strongly suggests, then there must have been intermediate stages between non-conscious information processing and full subjective awareness. But what would such intermediate stages look like? Can consciousness emerge gradually, or does it require some kind of threshold, a moment when the lights suddenly switch on? Some researchers have proposed what they call the emergence hypothesis. According to this view, consciousness arises when information processing systems reach a certain level of complexity and integration. Just as wetness emerges from the interaction of H2O molecules, or the properties of life emerge from the organization of chemical processes, consciousness emerges from the organization of neural processes. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts, giving rise to new properties that weren't present in the individual components. This emergence hypothesis is appealing because it suggests that consciousness could arise naturally from physical processes without requiring any non-physical ingredients, but it still doesn't explain why emergence should be accompanied by subjective experience. Why shouldn't highly complex integrated information processing systems simply process information more efficiently without any inner light of awareness accompanying their operations? Other researchers have suggested that the hard problem might be based on a fundamental misconception about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. Perhaps consciousness isn't something that emerges from brain activity, but rather something more fundamental, a basic feature of reality that becomes organized and structured by brain processes, but doesn't originate from them. This perspective leads us into territory that many scientists find uncomfortable, but which some philosophers and physicists have begun to take seriously. What if consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or electrical charge? What if every particle, every quantum field, every interaction in nature has some minimal form of subjective experience associated with it? This view, called panpsychism, suggests that consciousness doesn't emerge from non-conscious components, but rather that complex forms of consciousness are built up from simpler forms that exist at more basic levels of reality. As you contemplate this possibility, you might find it either deeply comforting or slightly unsettling. The idea that consciousness pervades the universe means that your awareness isn't an isolated accident, but part of a vast tapestry of experience that extends throughout the cosmos. Every atom in your body, every quantum interaction that makes up your neural activity might be participating in the larger symphony of cosmic awareness. Of course, this remains a speculative idea, not a proven scientific fact. Most mainstream neuroscientists remain skeptical of panpsychist theories, preferring to focus on the measurable correlates of consciousness in brain activity. But the hard problem remains unsolved, and increasingly, researchers are willing to consider radical possibilities in their attempts to bridge the explanatory gap. The practical implications of these questions extend far beyond academic philosophy. How we understand consciousness shapes how we think about artificial intelligence, about the moral status of other animals, about what it means to be human in a universe that might be far more aware than we ever imagined. If consciousness is fundamental to reality, then the emergence of aware beings like ourselves isn't an unlikely accident, but an inevitable expression of the universe's deepest nature. As we venture deeper into the mystery of consciousness, we encounter some of the most controversial and fascinating theories in modern science. What if awareness isn't just a product of classical neural computation, but involves quantum mechanical processes that operate at the very foundation of reality? This possibility takes us into territory where neuroscience meets quantum physics, where the strange rules that govern subatomic particles might also govern the emergence of conscious experience. The story begins with two remarkable figures: Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist who has made groundbreaking contributions to our understanding of black holes and space-time, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who has spent decades studying the biological basis of consciousness. Together, they developed what's known as the Orchestrated Objective Reduction Theory, or OR for short. According to this theory, consciousness arises from quantum processes occurring within microtubules, tiny protein structures that form the skeleton of nerve cells. Penrose and Hameroff proposed that these microtubules can maintain quantum coherence, allowing them to exist in superposition states where they process multiple possibilities simultaneously. When these quantum superpositions collapse, they suggest moments of conscious experience emerge. This idea was initially met with considerable skepticism. Critics argued that the brain is too warm, wet and noisy for delicate quantum effects to survive long enough to influence neural processing. Quantum coherence, they pointed out, typically requires extremely cold, isolated conditions, like those found in sophisticated physics laboratories. How could such effects persist in the chaotic environment of a living brain? But as research has progressed, evidence has emerged for quantum effects in biological systems that were previously thought impossible. Photosynthesis, it turns out, appears to use quantum coherence to achieve near-perfect energy transfer efficiency. Birds may navigate using quantum entanglement in proteins in their eyes. Even our sense of smell might depend on quantum tunneling effects that allow us to distinguish between molecules based on their vibrational frequencies. More recently, researchers have discovered quantum vibrations in microtubules at room temperature, providing some support for the OR theory. While this doesn't prove that consciousness involves quantum processes, it does suggest that the brain might be capable of supporting quantum effects that were previously thought impossible in biological systems. The implications of quantum consciousness theories extend far beyond neuroscience. If awareness involves quantum processes, then consciousness might be connected to the fundamental structure of reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. Quantum mechanics reveals a universe that's far stranger than our everyday experience suggests. A realm where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, where observation seems to play a fundamental role in determining reality, where distant particles can be instantaneously connected through quantum entanglement. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness might play a fundamental role in quantum mechanics itself, that the act of observation by a conscious mind might be what causes quantum superpositions to collapse into definite states. This remains highly speculative and controversial, but it raises profound questions about the relationship between mind and reality. If you're finding these ideas challenging to grasp, you're in good company. Quantum mechanics is notoriously counterintuitive, prompting physicist Niels Bohr to remark that anyone who isn't shocked by quantum theory hasn't understood it, but perhaps this strangeness is exactly what we should expect when probing the deepest levels of reality. Consider the possibility that your consciousness right now might involve quantum processes occurring in the microtubules of your brain cells. Each moment of awareness might emerge from the orchestrated collapse of quantum superpositions, connecting your individual mind to the quantum foundation of the cosmos. Your thoughts and experiences might be participating in the same strange quantum dance that governs the behavior of particles throughout the universe. This perspective suggests that consciousness isn't separate from the physical world, but intimately connected to its deepest structures. The boundary between mind and matter, between inner experience and outer reality, might be far more porous than we typically assume. If consciousness involves quantum processes, then awareness might be woven into the very fabric of space-time itself. But it's important to emphasize that these remain speculative ideas, not established scientific facts. While the evidence for quantum effects in biological systems is growing, the connection to consciousness remains unproven. Many neuroscientists continue to believe that classical neural computation is sufficient to explain conscious experience without invoking quantum mechanics. As we continue mapping the landscape of awareness, we discover that consciousness might not be as individual and isolated as we typically assume. Human consciousness, in particular, appears to be deeply social, shaped by our interactions with other minds in ways that suggest awareness itself might be, at least partly, a collective phenomenon. Consider how your own consciousness has been shaped by language. The words you're thinking right now, the concepts you use to understand your experience, the very structure of your thoughts. All of these have been inherited from countless generations of other minds. You think in English or whatever your native language might be, but that language doesn't belong to you alone. It's a collective creation, a shared space of meaning that connects your individual consciousness to a vast community of other aware beings. This linguistic dimension of consciousness reveals something profound about the nature of awareness itself. Your inner voice, the stream of verbal thoughts that accompanies much of your conscious experience, is speaking in words that were created by other people, using grammatical structures that evolved over thousands of years of social interaction. In a very real sense, other minds are participating in your consciousness every moment of every day. Recent neuroscience research has begun to reveal the biological basis of this social dimension of consciousness. Mirror neurons, first discovered in macaque monkeys, fire both when an animal performs an action and when it observes another animal performing the same action. These neurons seem to create a direct neural bridge between minds, allowing us to understand the actions and intentions of others by simulating them in our own brains. Theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have beliefs, desires, and intentions that may be different from our own, appears to be a fundamental component of human consciousness. This capacity develops gradually in children, typically emerging around age 4, and its absence or impairment is associated with autism spectrum disorders. The ability to model other minds, to imagine what it's like to be someone else, seems to be essential for the full development of self-awareness. Some researchers have proposed that human consciousness is essentially a social phenomenon, that self-awareness emerges from our capacity to see ourselves from the perspective of others. The voice in your head, they suggest, is internalized social interaction, the ongoing conversation between different aspects of your social self. You become conscious of yourself by learning to see yourself as others see you, creating an internal observer that monitors and evaluates your own thoughts and actions. This social dimension of consciousness extends beyond individual minds to collective forms of awareness that emerge from group interactions. Consider what happens when a crowd of people moves together, each individual responding to the movements of those around them, creating coordinated patterns that no single person planned or controls. Or think about the collective intelligence that emerges from online communities where thousands of individual minds contribute to solving problems that no one could solve alone. If you enjoy drifting through these explorations without interruption, members get every episode 48 hours early, completely ad-free. You can join them whenever you feel ready. There's something beautiful about sharing these contemplative journeys with others who appreciate the space between questions and answers. Some theories go even further, suggesting that consciousness itself might be a collective phenomenon that emerges from the interactions between individual brains. Just as individual neurons don't think, but thinking emerges from networks of neurons, perhaps individual minds don't generate consciousness, but consciousness emerges from networks of minds. Your awareness might be part of a larger pattern of awareness that includes not just your own brain, but the social and cultural environment in which you're embedded. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand the evolution of consciousness. Perhaps the dramatic expansion of human brain size over the past few million years wasn't just about individual intelligence, but about our capacity to participate in collective forms of consciousness. Language, culture, technology, all the achievements that distinguish human civilization might be expressions of this collective awareness rather than the products of isolated individual minds. The evidence for this collective dimension of consciousness can be seen in the remarkable achievements of human culture. No individual human invented language, mathematics, science, or art. These emerge from the collective intelligence of communities working together across generations. Each new discovery builds on previous discoveries. Each innovation combines existing ideas in novel ways. The consciousness that created the device you're using to listen to this, that composed the music that might be playing in the background, that built the shelter around you, is collective consciousness, the awareness that emerges from minds working together. As we near the end of our exploration, it's worth considering where consciousness might be heading. For the first time in the 4 billion year history of life on Earth, consciousness has become aware of its own evolution. We understand, at least partially, how awareness emerged from simpler forms of information processing. We can trace its development from the first stirrings in Cambrian seas to the complex social consciousness of human civilization. And for the first time, we're beginning to create forms of artificial consciousness that might one day rival or even surpass our own awareness. The development of artificial intelligence raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness itself. Can machines become truly conscious, or are they destined to remain sophisticated but unaware information processing systems? The answer depends partly on which theories of consciousness turn out to be correct. If awareness emerges from classical computational processes, then sufficiently complex AI systems might naturally develop consciousness. If it requires quantum processes, then artificial consciousness might require quantum computers. If it's a fundamental feature of reality, then perhaps any sufficiently complex system, biological or artificial, can become aware. Recent developments in AI have brought these questions into sharp focus. Large language models can engage in conversations that seem to demonstrate understanding, creativity, and even emotional responses. They can solve problems, write poetry, and engage in philosophical discussions about the nature of consciousness itself. But do they actually experience anything, or are they simply very sophisticated pattern-matching systems that give the appearance of awareness without the inner reality? This question might soon become more than academic. As AI systems become more sophisticated, we may need to grapple with questions of machine consciousness, not just as philosophical puzzles, but as practical, ethical issues. If artificial minds can suffer, do we have moral obligations toward them? If they can experience joy, wonder, and love, should they have rights? These questions challenge us to think more deeply about what consciousness really is and what moral status it confers. But the future of consciousness isn't just about artificial minds. Human consciousness itself continues to evolve, shaped by new technologies, new forms of social organization, and new ways of understanding ourselves and our place in the universe. The internet has created unprecedented opportunities for minds to connect and collaborate across vast distances. Virtual and augmented reality technologies are beginning to expand the boundaries of human experience in ways that might fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness. Some researchers speculate about the possibility of directly linking human brains through brain-computer interfaces, creating shared consciousness experiences that transcend individual minds. Others explore the potential for uploading consciousness to digital systems, preserving awareness beyond the biological substrate that gave rise to it. While these remain speculative possibilities, they illustrate how consciousness might continue to evolve in ways we can barely imagine. Perhaps most importantly, our growing understanding of consciousness is changing how we see ourselves and our relationship to the rest of the universe. The recognition that awareness extends throughout the animal kingdom has profound implications for how we treat other species and the environments they depend on. The possibility that consciousness is fundamental to reality suggests that we're not isolated observers in an unconscious cosmos, but participants in a universe that's aware of itself through us. As you reflect on your own consciousness, notice how it connects you to this vast story of cosmic awakening. The awareness through which you're experiencing these ideas emerged from billions of years of evolution, from the first stirrings of sensation in primitive organisms to the complex social consciousness of human civilization. You're not separate from this story, you're part of it, a temporary organization of matter and energy that has somehow acquired the capacity to contemplate its own existence. The neurons firing in your brain as you consider these thoughts are made from atoms forged in the cores of ancient stars. The patterns of activity that constitute your consciousness are part of an unbroken chain of awareness that stretches back through countless generations of conscious beings. You're simultaneously utterly unique, the universe experiencing itself from your particular perspective, and completely connected to the larger pattern of consciousness that permeates the cosmos. In our next exploration, we'll delve even deeper into these mysteries, examining how consciousness might influence the very brain that seems to create it. The relationship between mind and brain is far more complex than most people realize, and new research suggests that consciousness might play an active role in shaping neural activity rather than simply emerging from it. If you're intrigued by the possibility that awareness might be more fundamental than we typically assume, you'll find our examination of what if consciousness controls the brain both fascinating and deeply thought-provoking. Until then, rest in the wonder of your own awareness, this ancient gift that first emerged in Cambrian seas and now illuminates your understanding of existence itself. You are the universe conscious of itself, matter awakened to its own mystery, the cosmos dreaming and knowing that it dreams. But there's something even more extraordinary about consciousness that we haven't yet explored, something so fundamental that we often overlook it entirely. Your awareness right now isn't just conscious of the world around you, it's conscious of being conscious. You can think about your own thoughts, observe your own observations, reflect on the very process of reflection itself. This recursive quality of consciousness, this capacity for self-awareness, represents perhaps the most profound mystery in all of existence. Take a moment to notice what's happening in your mind as you listen to these words. You're not just processing information about consciousness. You're experiencing your own consciousness, processing that information. There's a part of your awareness that can step back and watch the rest of your awareness at work, like a mirror reflecting into another mirror, creating an infinite regression of self-observation. This recursive nature of consciousness poses what philosophers call the meta-problem of consciousness. Even if we could explain how subjective experience emerges from neural activity, we would still need to explain how consciousness becomes aware of itself. How does our information processing system develop the capacity to model its own modeling processes? What evolutionary advantage could possibly justify the metabolic cost of such recursive self-monitoring? The answer may lie in the extraordinary flexibility that self-awareness provides. A creature that can observe its own mental processes can also modify them. It can notice when its attention wanders and redirect it. It can recognize patterns in its own thinking and adjust its strategies accordingly. It can imagine itself in different situations and evaluate how it might respond. Self-awareness creates a space for self-improvement, for learning not just about the world, but about learning itself. As you reflect on your own capacity for self-reflection, notice how it feels to be aware of your awareness. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. The very fact that you can contemplate your own consciousness is what makes abstract thought possible, what allows you to consider ideas that have no direct connection to your immediate sensory experience, what enables you to understand concepts like infinity, justice, or love. Recent neuroscience research has begun to identify the brain networks associated with this self-reflective consciousness. The default mode network, a collection of brain regions that becomes active when we're not focused on the outside world, appears to be particularly important for self-referential thinking. When you daydream, remember the past, imagine the future, or simply let your mind wander, this network lights up, suggesting that self-awareness emerges from the brain's capacity to turn its attention inward. But the recursive nature of consciousness extends beyond individual self-awareness to what we might call collective self-reflection. Human civilization represents, in many ways, consciousness becoming aware of its own evolution. We can trace the development of awareness through geological time, understand the mechanisms that gave rise to it, and even begin to guide its future development. We are the universe, not just conscious of itself, but conscious of how it became conscious. This collective self-awareness has accelerated dramatically in recent centuries. The scientific revolution represented consciousness turning its attention to the systematic study of reality. The development of psychology marked consciousness beginning to study itself directly. And now, with neuroscience and artificial intelligence, we're approaching the possibility of consciousness fully understanding its own mechanisms, perhaps even reproducing itself in artificial systems. The implications of this recursive awakening are staggering. For the first time in cosmic history, consciousness is becoming conscious of consciousness itself. We're not just aware beings, we're aware of being aware, and aware of that awareness spreading throughout the universe as life and intelligence evolve on countless worlds. We represent the cosmos waking up to its own nature, matter organizing itself into patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. Some philosophers have suggested that this recursive self-awareness might be the ultimate goal of evolution, the direction toward which complexity naturally tends. If consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, as some theories suggest, then perhaps the evolution of increasingly sophisticated forms of self-aware consciousness represents the universe's attempt to understand itself ever more completely. As we delve deeper into the nature of consciousness, we discover that awareness isn't confined to the boundaries of our skull. Your consciousness extends far beyond your brain, reaching out into the world through your body, your tools, your relationships, and even your environment. This understanding challenges the traditional view of mind as something that exists purely inside the head, revealing instead a consciousness that is embodied, extended, and deeply interconnected with the world around it. Consider how your body participates in your consciousness right now. Your breathing, your posture, the subtle sensations flowing through your nervous system, all of these are integral to your experience of awareness. When you feel anxious, you might notice your heart racing or your breathing becoming shallow. When you're deeply relaxed, your entire body settles into a different state. Consciousness isn't something that happens to your body. It's something that emerges from the dynamic interaction between your brain, your body, and your environment. This embodied view of consciousness has profound implications for how we understand the evolution of awareness, the development of complex motor systems, the ability to manipulate objects with precision, the capacity for expressive gestures and facial expressions. All of these bodily capabilities may have been crucial for the emergence of sophisticated consciousness. Your hands aren't just tools that your mind controls, they're extensions of your mind itself, participating directly in your thinking processes. Watch what happens when you try to solve a complex problem or explain a difficult concept. Your hands move spontaneously, tracing shapes in the air, pointing to imaginary objects, helping to give physical form to abstract thoughts. This isn't just illustration. Research suggests that these gestures actually participate in the thinking process itself, that consciousness uses the body's movements to extend its computational capacity beyond the brain. The extended mind thesis, proposed by philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers, suggests that consciousness can literally extend beyond the boundaries of the individual organism to include tools, technologies, and environmental resources that function as parts of our cognitive system. Your smartphone, for instance, might not just be a device you use. It might be an extension of your memory and attention systems, a literal part of your extended mind. Think about how naturally you reach for your phone when you need to remember something, navigate to a new location, or connect with another person. The device has become so integrated into your cognitive processes that the boundary between your biological mind and your technological tools has become blurred. You don't just use your phone to access information, you think with it, remember through it, and extend your awareness across vast networks of digital connection. This extension of consciousness through technology represents a new phase in the evolution of awareness. For most of evolutionary history, consciousness was limited to the processing capacity of individual brains, and the communication bandwidth of face-to-face interaction. But now, through digital networks, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality technologies, consciousness is beginning to extend itself across global networks, creating new forms of collective awareness that transcend individual minds. As you consider your own extended consciousness, notice how your awareness reaches beyond your immediate physical presence. Through language, you can think thoughts that were originally thought by people who lived centuries ago. Through books, videos, and digital media, you can experience perspectives from around the world and across history. Through social networks, your consciousness participates in ongoing conversations with thousands of other minds. You are not an isolated island of awareness, but a node in a vast network of interconnected consciousness. The environmental dimension of extended consciousness is equally important. Your awareness is shaped by the spaces you inhabit, the natural environments you encounter, the quality of light and air around you. When you walk through a forest, your consciousness doesn't just observe the trees. It resonates with the complex patterns of life surrounding you. Your nervous system attuning to rhythms and frequencies that have shaped awareness for millions of years. Indigenous traditions have long recognized this environmental dimension of consciousness, understanding awareness as something that emerges from the relationship between mind, body, and land. Modern environmental psychology is beginning to validate these ancient insights, showing that exposure to natural environments enhances cognitive function, reduces stress, and promotes well-being in ways that suggest consciousness itself is healthiest when it remains connected to the natural world from which it emerged. This extended view of consciousness has important implications for how we think about the future of awareness. As virtual and augmented reality technologies become more sophisticated, the boundaries between internal and external, between mind and world, may become even more fluid. We may develop forms of consciousness that seamlessly blend biological and artificial intelligence, individual and collective awareness, local and global perspectives. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of consciousness is its creative capacity. Your awareness right now isn't just passively receiving information about the world. It's actively constructing your experience, weaving together sensory data, memories, expectations, and imagination into the rich tapestry of conscious experience. This creative aspect of consciousness may be one of the most important clues to understanding its deeper nature and ultimate significance. Every moment of conscious experience involves an act of creation. When you look at a sunset, your brain doesn't simply record the wavelengths of light entering your eyes. It constructs the experience of beauty, meaning, and emotional resonance that makes the sunset more than just photons hitting your retina. Your consciousness is constantly interpreting, elaborating, and enriching your experience, adding layers of meaning that don't exist in the raw sensory data itself. This creative capacity extends beyond individual experience to the generation of genuinely novel ideas, artistic expressions, and scientific discoveries. The history of human consciousness is also the history of creativity, of minds generating insights, inventions, and expressions that didn't exist before and couldn't be predicted from previous patterns. Consciousness doesn't just process information, it creates new information, new patterns, new possibilities that expand the universe's repertoire of forms and experiences. Consider the extraordinary creativity that has emerged from human consciousness over the past few centuries. Music that explores emotional territories never before mapped. Mathematical theorems that reveal hidden symmetries in nature. technologies that extend human capabilities in ways that would have seemed magical to previous generations. Art that captures aspects of experience too subtle for ordinary language. All of these represent consciousness, creating genuinely new possibilities, expanding the universe's capacity for complexity and beauty. As you listen to these words, your own consciousness is participating in this creative process. You're not just passively absorbing information, you're actively constructing meaning, making connections to your own experience, generating new insights and questions. The understanding you're developing right now is unique to you, a novel perspective on consciousness that has never existed before and will never exist again in quite the same way. Some theorists have suggested that this creative capacity of consciousness might be connected to quantum indeterminacy, to the fundamental unpredictability that exists at the heart of physical reality. If consciousness does indeed involve quantum processes, as some theories propose, then the creativity of awareness might tap into the same source of novelty that drives the evolution of the universe itself. This remains speculative, but it suggests that consciousness might be more than just an accidental byproduct of evolution. It might be an expression of the universe's fundamental creative tendency. The evolution of consciousness can be seen as an ongoing creative process, with each new form of awareness adding new possibilities to the cosmic repertoire. The emergence of vision during the Cambrian explosion didn't just allow organisms to see, it created entirely new categories of experience, new ways for the universe to know itself. The development of language didn't just improve communication, it opened up vast new territories of thought, meaning, and cultural evolution. And now, as consciousness becomes aware of its own evolution, we may be entering a new phase of creative development. For the first time, awareness can consciously participate in its own evolution, making deliberate choices about how consciousness develops, rather than leaving it entirely to the blind processes of natural selection. We can design technologies to enhance and extend our cognitive capabilities. We can create artificial minds that might experience reality in ways we can barely imagine. We can even begin to guide the evolution of consciousness itself. Take a breath and consider what this means for your own role in this cosmic story. You're not just a passive observer of consciousness evolution. You're an active participant, making choices every day about how to develop and express your own awareness. Every time you choose to pay attention rather than drift into distraction, every time you cultivate empathy rather than indifference, every time you create something new rather than simply consuming what already exists, you're participating in the conscious evolution of consciousness itself. The choices you make about how to use your awareness ripple out beyond your individual experience. Through your interactions with others, your contributions to culture, your influence on the environments around you, your consciousness participates in shaping the larger patterns of awareness that characterize human civilization and perhaps ultimately cosmic evolution itself. This perspective suggests that consciousness carries with it a kind of cosmic responsibility. If awareness is indeed fundamental to reality, if consciousness represents the universe's capacity to know and create itself, then how we choose to develop and express our own consciousness matters not just for ourselves, but for the larger story of cosmic awakening. As our exploration draws toward its close, we find ourselves face to face with perhaps the deepest paradox of consciousness. The very awareness through which you're understanding these concepts about consciousness is itself the thing being explained. You are using consciousness to contemplate consciousness, awareness studying awareness. the universe examining itself through the lens of your experience. This creates a strange loop that defies our usual categories of subject and object, knower and known. This paradox isn't just a philosophical curiosity, it reveals something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. Unlike every other phenomenon that science studies, consciousness cannot be observed from the outside. We can measure brain activity, map neural networks, and correlate mental states with physical processes. But the inner reality of conscious experience remains accessible only to the consciousness experiencing it. You are the only one who can know what it's like to be you. And yet somehow, through language and empathy, through art and science, through all the creative expressions of consciousness, we manage to share something of our inner experience with others. The words you're hearing right now are carrying information from one consciousness to another, creating a bridge across the apparent isolation of individual awareness. In this moment, your consciousness and the consciousness that crafted these words are participating in a shared exploration of the mystery they both embody. This sharing of consciousness across individual minds points to something even more remarkable. Perhaps consciousness isn't as private and isolated as we typically assume. Perhaps awareness is more like a field than a possession, more like a space that individual minds inhabit than something that individual minds contain. The boundaries between conscious minds might be more porous than they appear, especially when we consider the social, cultural, and technological networks that connect individual awareness into larger patterns of collective intelligence. As you reflect on your own experience right now, notice how difficult it is to locate the exact boundaries of your consciousness. Where does your awareness end and the world begin? Your consciousness includes your thoughts, but those thoughts are constructed from language you learned from others. It includes your sensations, but those sensations arise from your interaction with an environment that extends far beyond your body. It includes your memories, but those memories are shaped by experiences you've shared with countless other conscious beings. The more closely you examine your consciousness, the more it reveals itself to be a dynamic process rather than a static thing, a verb rather than a noun, an activity rather than an object. Your awareness is constantly flowing, changing, responding to new information, and creating new patterns of meaning. It's not something you have, it's something you are. More precisely, it's something you do, a way of being in relationship with the reality around you. This understanding of consciousness as process rather than possession has profound implications for how we think about personal identity, death, and the meaning of life. If consciousness is a dynamic pattern rather than a fixed entity, then perhaps what we call the self is more like a wave in the ocean of awareness than an isolated drop of water. The wave eventually subsides back into the ocean, but the ocean continues, and new waves continuously arise. Some spiritual traditions have long taught that individual consciousness is ultimately an expression of universal consciousness, that the awareness looking out through your eyes is the same awareness that looks out through every conscious being. This remains a matter of contemplation rather than scientific verification, but it's worth considering as you reflect on your own experience of awareness. The paradox of consciousness studying itself also reveals the limitations of purely objective approaches to understanding awareness. Science has been extraordinarily successful at studying phenomena from the outside, treating them as objects to be measured and analysed. But consciousness challenges this approach because it can only be fully known from the inside through the direct experience of being conscious. This doesn't mean that objective scientific approaches are useless for understanding consciousness. They've revealed crucial insights about the neural correlates of awareness, the evolution of consciousness, and the conditions that support conscious experience. But it does suggest that a complete understanding of consciousness might require integrating objective and subjective approaches, third-person and first-person perspectives, scientific measurement, and contemplative introspection. The future study of consciousness may need to develop new methodologies that honor both the objective reality of neural processes and the subjective reality of conscious experience. This might involve sophisticated brain-computer interfaces that can measure neural activity while simultaneously gathering detailed reports of subjective experience. It might involve contemplative neuroscience that combines meditation practice with brain imaging to map the neural correlates of different states of consciousness. It might even involve new forms of artificial intelligence that can report their own subjective experiences, if such experiences emerge in sufficiently sophisticated artificial systems. As we reach the final movements of our exploration, certain questions continue to echo through the corridors of consciousness research, questions that may be eternal companions to any awareness sophisticated enough to ask them. These aren't problems to be solved so much as mysteries to be lived, koans that deepen rather than resolve as our understanding grows. The first of these eternal questions is perhaps the most fundamental. Why is there something it's like to be anything at all? We can explain the functional advantages of information processing, the evolutionary benefits of complex behavior, the neural mechanisms that support attention and memory. But why should any of this be accompanied by the inner light of subjective experience? Why shouldn't sophisticated biological information processing systems simply process information without any accompanying sense of what that processing feels like? This question becomes even more profound when we consider the possibility that consciousness might be universal, that every interaction in nature might have some minimal form of subjective experience associated with it. If this panpsychist view is correct, then the question becomes not just why humans and animals are conscious, but why the universe itself seems to be characterized by some form of interiority, some capacity for experience that accompanies its physical processes. The second eternal question concerns the relationship between consciousness and time. Your awareness right now has a peculiar temporal structure. It seems to exist in an eternal present moment, yet that present moment is constantly informed by memories of the past and anticipations of the future. How does consciousness create this sense of flowing time? Is the experience of temporal passage something that consciousness adds to reality, or does it reflect something fundamental about the nature of time itself? These questions about consciousness and time become particularly intriguing when we consider that modern physics suggests time might not flow in the way our consciousness experiences it. According to relativity theory, the distinction between past, present, and future might be an illusion, a construct of consciousness rather than a feature of fundamental reality. Perhaps consciousness creates time as much as it exists within time. The third eternal question concerns the scope and boundaries of consciousness. We've explored how awareness might extend beyond individual brains to include bodies, tools, environments, and social networks. But where does this extension end? Is there a meaningful boundary between conscious and non-conscious systems? Or does awareness shade gradually into non-awareness without any sharp transitions? As you contemplate these questions, notice that you're engaging with them not just intellectually, but through the very consciousness they seek to understand. Your awareness right now is simultaneously the questioner and the questioned, the seeker and the sought. This reflexive quality of consciousness means that these eternal questions aren't just abstract philosophical problems. They're lived experiences, mysteries that unfold within the very awareness that contemplates them. The fourth eternal question touches on the purpose and meaning of consciousness itself. If awareness emerged through billions of years of evolution, if it represents the universe's capacity to know itself, what is its ultimate significance? Is consciousness simply an accidental byproduct of complex information processing, or does it serve some deeper cosmic purpose? Some theories suggest that consciousness might be the universe's way of increasing its own complexity and creativity. Each new form of awareness adds new possibilities to reality, new ways for the cosmos to organize and express itself. From this perspective, your consciousness isn't just observing the universe from the outside, it's participating in the universe's ongoing creation of itself. Others propose that consciousness might be connected to the fundamental structure of reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. If quantum mechanics does involve consciousness in some fundamental way, if awareness plays a role in the collapse of quantum superpositions, then consciousness might be woven into the very fabric of physical law. Your thoughts and experiences might be participating in the ongoing creation of reality itself, though this remains highly speculative. The fifth eternal question concerns the future of consciousness. As awareness becomes increasingly aware of itself, as it begins to guide its own evolution through technology and cultural development, where might it be heading? Will consciousness eventually understand itself completely, solving all the mysteries we have explored together? Will it transcend its biological origins, spreading throughout the cosmos in forms we can barely imagine? Will it discover that it was always more fundamental than it realized, that the universe itself is a form of cosmic consciousness, of which individual awareness is just a temporary expression? These questions don't have final answers, and perhaps that's as it should be. The mystery of consciousness might be inexhaustible, always deeper than our current understanding, always opening new territories for exploration. The fact that you can contemplate these questions, that awareness can wonder about awareness, might be the most remarkable fact of all. As our journey together draws toward its close, take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary nature of what we've explored. We've traced consciousness from its possible origins in quantum fields, through its emergence in Cambrian seas, to its flowering in human culture, and its potential future in artificial systems and cosmic evolution. We've considered how awareness extends beyond individual brains to encompass bodies, tools, environments, and social networks. We've explored the creative capacity of consciousness and its role in the universe's ongoing self-creation. But perhaps most importantly, we've done all of this through consciousness itself, through the very awareness we've been trying to understand. Your consciousness has been the medium through which these ideas have unfolded, the light by which these concepts have been illuminated, the space in which these questions have been contemplated. In our next exploration, we'll delve into an even deeper mystery, one that challenges our basic assumptions about the relationship between mind and brain. The conventional view suggests that consciousness emerges from neural activity, that awareness is produced by the brain like music is produced by a radio. But what if this relationship is more complex than we realize? What if consciousness plays an active role in shaping the very neural processes that seem to create it? If you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about the mind-brain relationship, if you're prepared to consider the possibility that awareness might be more fundamental than the physical processes we typically use to explain it, then our investigation of what if consciousness controls the brain will take you even deeper into the mystery of what you truly are. Until then, rest in the wonder of your own awareness. You are consciousness contemplating consciousness, the universe examining itself through your eyes, matter awakened to its own extraordinary nature. In the quiet space between these words and your understanding of them, in the gentle flow of awareness that makes this moment possible, you embody the deepest mystery and the greatest miracle in all of existence. The ancient question of how consciousness began has led us to an even more profound realization. Perhaps consciousness didn't begin at all. Perhaps it has always been here, woven into the fabric of reality itself, waiting for the right conditions to flower into the magnificent awareness through which you experience these very thoughts. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are the cosmos conscious of itself, and that consciousness has no beginning and no end, only an eternal awakening to its own infinite nature. As we continue our exploration into the depths of consciousness, we encounter something that challenges our most basic assumptions about the boundaries of individual awareness. What if consciousness isn't as isolated as we typically assume? What if individual minds can literally synchronize, creating shared patterns of neural activity that bridge the gap between separate brains? Recent neuroscience research has revealed something extraordinary happening when conscious beings connect deeply with one another. Picture two musicians playing together in perfect harmony. Their instruments are separate, their bodies distinct, yet somehow they create music that neither could produce alone. Now imagine something similar happening with consciousness itself. When people engage in deep conversation, when lovers gaze into each other's eyes, when meditation practitioners sit together in silence, their brain waves begin to synchronize in ways that suggest consciousness might be more collective than we ever imagined. This phenomenon, called neural synchronization or brainwave entrainment, has been documented in laboratories around the world. When people share meaningful experiences, their neural oscillations begin to align, creating synchronized patterns of electrical activity across separate brains. It's as if consciousness naturally seeks resonance with other consciousness, like tuning forks that vibrate together when brought into proximity. The implications of this synchronization extend far beyond neuroscience laboratories. Consider what happens when you have a deep conversation with someone you love. There are moments when words seem insufficient, when understanding passes between you without explanation, when you finish each other's thoughts or respond to feelings that haven't been expressed. Perhaps these moments aren't just metaphorically connected. Perhaps they reflect a literal synchronization of consciousness, minds temporarily merging into a shared field of awareness. This research on neural synchronization connects to ancient wisdom traditions that have long spoken of consciousness as fundamentally interconnected. Contemplative practices across cultures have developed techniques for cultivating what they call unity consciousness, expanded awareness, or enlightened states where the boundaries between self and other seem to dissolve. While these remain subjective experiences that science cannot fully verify, the growing evidence for neural synchronization suggests there might be neurobiological foundations for these profound states of connection. As you listen to these words right now, consider the possibility that your consciousness is already participating in forms of synchronization you might not notice. When you read a book and feel deeply connected to the author's ideas, when you watch a film and become emotionally absorbed in the story, when you listen to music and feel moved by the composer's vision, Your neural patterns might be resonating with patterns that originated in other minds, creating temporary bridges of shared consciousness. The study of neural synchronization has revealed that this phenomenon occurs across multiple scales of time and space. Brain regions within individual minds synchronize their activity to create coherent conscious experiences. Different individuals synchronize when they engage in shared activities. Groups of people can develop collective rhythms of attention and awareness. And some researchers speculate that even larger scales of synchronization might be possible, though this remains highly speculative. One particularly fascinating area of research involves what scientists call collective flow states. These occur when groups of people become so deeply coordinated in their activities that individual self-consciousness seems to disappear, replaced by a kind of group awareness that transcends individual minds. Athletes describe this during peak team performances. Musicians experience it during improvised sessions. Even scientists report it during collaborative research, when multiple minds seem to merge into a single, investigative consciousness. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences of collective flow. Perhaps you felt it during deep conversations that seemed to take on a life of their own, where insights emerge that no single participant could have generated alone. Maybe you've experienced it during group meditation, where the collective silence seems deeper and more profound than individual practice. Or possibly during creative collaborations, where the group produces something that surprises everyone involved, as if the collective consciousness had ideas that individual minds couldn't access. The biological mechanisms underlying neural synchronization involve complex networks of communication between brains. When people interact closely, they exchange subtle signals through multiple channels. Micro-expressions, vocal tones, body postures, even pheromones and electromagnetic fields generated by neural activity. These signals can influence the timing and patterns of neural oscillations, creating feedback loops that gradually align separate nervous systems. But synchronization isn't just about communication between existing conscious minds. Some researchers have begun exploring whether collective consciousness might have emergent properties that transcend individual awareness. Just as consciousness seems to emerge from the collective activity of neurons, perhaps higher forms of consciousness might emerge from the collective activity of individual minds working together. This possibility connects to questions about the future evolution of consciousness we touched on earlier. As digital technologies create new channels for minds to connect and coordinate, as brain-computer interfaces allow direct neural communication, as artificial intelligence systems begin to participate in collective thinking processes, we might be approaching new forms of consciousness that operate at scales beyond individual brains. These ideas remain largely speculative, but they point toward a view of consciousness that's far more dynamic and interconnected than traditional individualistic perspectives suggest. Your awareness right now might not be confined to the boundaries of your skull. It might be part of a larger field of consciousness that includes your immediate environment, the people you're connected to, the cultural networks you participate in, and perhaps even patterns of awareness that extend across the entire biosphere. Now we venture into territory where consciousness research meets the deepest mysteries of quantum physics. What if awareness itself operates according to quantum principles? What if consciousness isn't just something that emerges from classical neural computation, but something that participates in the strange, non-local, interconnected reality that quantum mechanics reveals at the foundation of the physical world? This is speculative territory, And it's important to emphasize that no scientific consensus exists about quantum consciousness theories. But the possibilities are fascinating enough to explore, especially as evidence accumulates for quantum effects in biological systems that were previously thought impossible. The boundary between classical and quantum physics might not be as clear-cut as we once believed, particularly when it comes to the delicate, complex systems that support conscious experience. Consider the basic principles of quantum mechanics and how they might relate to consciousness. In the quantum world, particles can exist in superposition, simultaneously occupying multiple states until they are observed. They can be entangled, sharing instantaneous correlations across vast distances. They can tunnel through barriers that should be impermeable according to classical physics. And perhaps most mysteriously, the act of observation seems to play a fundamental role in determining which of many possible realities actually manifests. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness might be intimately connected to these quantum phenomena. Not in the sense that your thoughts directly control quantum events, which would be scientifically unsupported, but in the more subtle sense that awareness itself might operate according to quantum principles, existing in superposition until observation collapses it into specific experiences, remaining non-locally connected to other conscious systems, tunneling through the barriers that seem to separate individual minds. This remains unproven, but it's a speculative idea worth contemplating as you reflect on your own experience of consciousness. Have you ever noticed how your awareness seems to exist in multiple states simultaneously until you focus your attention? How different aspects of your consciousness can seem entangled, with changes in one area instantly affecting others? How thoughts and insights sometimes seem to tunnel through from unconscious to conscious awareness without passing through any obvious intermediate stages. The quantum field theories of consciousness propose that awareness might emerge from quantum fields that extend throughout space, similar to electromagnetic fields, but involving information and experience rather than energy and force. In this view, individual brains wouldn't generate consciousness so much as they would tune into and modulate pre-existing fields of awareness, like radio receivers picking up and processing signals from the quantum vacuum. This perspective connects to the panpsychist theories we explored earlier, but with a specifically quantum mechanical foundation. If consciousness is indeed a fundamental feature of reality, it might manifest through quantum fields that permeate all of space and time. Your individual awareness would then be a localized excitation in this universal field of consciousness, temporarily organized by your neural activity, but not fundamentally separate from the larger field. As you consider this possibility, notice how it feels to imagine consciousness as a field rather than a possession, as something you participate in rather than something you contain. This shift in perspective might change how you relate to your own awareness and how you understand your connection to other conscious beings. If consciousness is indeed field-like, then the boundaries between minds might be more like the boundaries between waves in the ocean, distinct but not separate, individual but interconnected. The quantum field approach also offers potential insights into some of the more mysterious aspects of consciousness we've explored. The unity of conscious experience, the way diverse sensory inputs get integrated into coherent perceptions, might reflect the holistic properties of quantum fields. The creativity of consciousness, its capacity to generate genuinely novel ideas and insights, might tap into the inherent indeterminacy and possibility that characterizes quantum systems. Even the recursive, self-aware nature of consciousness might find explanation in quantum mechanics. Some interpretations suggest that quantum systems require observers to collapse their superpositions into definite states. If consciousness operates quantum mechanically, then self-awareness might be consciousness observing itself, creating recursive loops where awareness collapses its own superpositions through the act of self-observation. But it's crucial to emphasize that these remain speculative ideas, not established scientific facts. The evidence for quantum effects in neural systems is still emerging, and the connection between these effects and conscious experience remains unproven. The brain might operate entirely through classical physical processes, with consciousness emerging from the complex organization of classical neural networks without requiring any quantum mechanical explanations. What's valuable about exploring these quantum perspectives isn't their truth value, which remains uncertain, but their capacity to expand our imagination about what consciousness might be. They invite us to consider awareness not as an isolated phenomenon confined to individual brains, but as something that might be woven into the fundamental structure of reality itself. This possibility has profound implications for how we understand our place in the universe. If consciousness does operate according to quantum principles, if awareness is indeed connected to the quantum foundation of reality, then your consciousness isn't separate from the cosmos. It's a direct expression of the universe's deepest nature, matter organized in such a way that it can experience and contemplate its own quantum essence. The practical implications of quantum consciousness theories remain largely unexplored, but they suggest interesting possibilities for the future development of awareness. Quantum technologies are already beginning to revolutionize computing and communication. If consciousness does involve quantum processes, then perhaps these technologies might eventually be used to enhance and extend human awareness in ways we can barely imagine. Quantum computers can process multiple possibilities simultaneously through superposition. Quantum communication systems can transmit information instantaneously through entanglement. If consciousness operates quantum mechanically, then perhaps future consciousness technologies might allow minds to explore multiple realities simultaneously, to communicate through non-local quantum connections, to access forms of awareness that transcend the classical limitations of individual brains. But even without future technologies, contemplating quantum consciousness can enrich your understanding of your current awareness. As you sit with these ideas, notice how consciousness seems to exhibit quantum-like properties. The way attention can be in multiple places simultaneously until you focus it. The way insights sometimes emerge suddenly from unconscious processing. The way your awareness seems connected to others through channels that classical physics doesn't fully explain. Whether or not consciousness literally operates according to quantum mechanics, thinking about it in quantum terms can deepen your appreciation for the mystery and wonder of your own awareness. You are not just a classical information processing system. You are something far more subtle, far more interconnected, far more mysterious than classical physics suggests. As our journey through the landscape of consciousness continues to unfold, we encounter a perspective that challenges the very notion of mind as something contained within individual organisms. What if consciousness isn't located inside brains at all, but exists in the relationships between minds, bodies, and environments? What if awareness is more like an ecosystem than an object, something that emerges from complex webs of interaction rather than residing in any single location? This ecological view of consciousness draws inspiration from systems thinking, environmental psychology, and the growing recognition that individual organisms are always embedded in larger networks of relationship and communication. Your consciousness right now isn't just a product of neural activity inside your skull. It's emerging from your interaction with these words, with the environment around you, with the cultural and linguistic systems that give meaning to language, with the entire web of relationships that constitute your lived experience. Consider how dramatically your consciousness changes depending on your environment. The awareness you experience in a busy city street is qualitatively different from the consciousness that emerges when you're alone in a forest. The mental states that arise during conversations with loved ones are distinct from those that occur during solitary reflection. Your consciousness isn't just observing these different environments, it's being shaped by them, co-created through your ongoing interaction with the world around you. And this environmental dimension of consciousness has deep evolutionary roots. For billions of years, awareness evolved in intimate relationship with natural environments. The rhythms of day and night, the cycles of seasons, the sounds and sights and smells of living ecosystems. All of these shape the development of consciousness in ways that continue to influence how awareness operates today. When you feel more alert and creative in natural settings, when your mood improves after spending time outdoors, when you experience a sense of peace and connection in natural environments, you're experiencing the deep evolutionary relationship between consciousness and the living world. But the ecology of mind extends beyond natural environments to include the social and cultural ecosystems in which human consciousness is embedded. Language itself is an ecological phenomenon, a collective creation that emerges from countless interactions between minds across generations. The words you're thinking right now carry traces of every mind that has ever used them, every conversation that has shaped their meaning, every cultural context that has influenced their significance. As you reflect on this, notice how your thoughts are never entirely your own. They're constructed from elements borrowed from other minds, combined in ways that are influenced by cultural patterns, expressed through linguistic structures that evolved through social interaction. Your consciousness is more like a temporary eddy in the flowing stream of collective mind than an isolated island of individual awareness. The technological dimension of the consciousness ecology has become increasingly important in recent decades. Digital networks, artificial intelligence systems, virtual and augmented reality technologies, all of these create new environments for consciousness, new contexts in which awareness can emerge and evolve. When you interact with digital systems, your consciousness is being extended and modified by artificial processes, creating hybrid forms of awareness that blend biological and technological elements. This technological extension of consciousness raises fascinating questions about the future of awareness. As digital systems become more sophisticated, as brain-computer interfaces allow direct neural interaction with artificial networks, as virtual environments become increasingly immersive, the boundary between natural and artificial consciousness might become increasingly blurred. Your descendants might experience forms of awareness that seamlessly integrate biological and technological processes, individual and collective intelligence, local and global perspectives. But even with current technologies, you can observe how digital systems participate in your consciousness ecology. When you use search engines to find information, when you rely on navigation systems to find your way, when you use social media to connect with others, these technologies aren't just tools you use, they're extensions of your cognitive system, artificial components of your extended mind that participate directly in your thinking and awareness processes. The ecological view of consciousness also illuminates the interconnected nature of mental health and well-being. If consciousness emerges from relationships between minds, bodies, and environments, then psychological wellness depends not just on individual brain function, but on the health of the entire ecosystem in which consciousness is embedded. Social connections, environmental conditions, cultural contexts, all of these contribute to the quality of conscious experience. This perspective has practical implications for how we cultivate and care for consciousness. Just as ecological health depends on biodiversity, clean air and water, and sustainable relationships between species, the health of consciousness might depend on diverse social connections, supportive environments, and sustainable relationships between individual minds and the larger systems they participate in. As you consider your own consciousness ecology, take a moment to notice all the elements that are contributing to your current experience of awareness. The physical environment around you, the social relationships that shape your sense of self, the cultural traditions that inform your understanding, the technological systems that extend your cognitive reach, the natural rhythms that continue to influence your mental states. Your consciousness isn't happening in isolation. It's emerging from this rich web of relationships and interactions. This ecological understanding of consciousness suggests that caring for awareness involves caring for the entire ecosystem in which mind emerges, protecting natural environments, nurturing social connections, creating supportive cultural contexts, developing beneficial technologies. All of these are ways of caring for consciousness itself. When you tend to your relationships, when you spend time in nature, when you contribute to positive cultural change, when you use technology mindfully, you're participating in the cultivation of consciousness at scales far beyond your individual mind. The implications extend to how we think about consciousness research itself. If awareness is ecological, then studying isolated brains in laboratory settings might miss crucial aspects of how consciousness actually operates in real-world contexts. Understanding consciousness might require studying minds in relationship, awareness in environment, the dynamic interactions between individual and collective intelligence. Future consciousness research might need to develop new methodologies that can capture the ecological nature of awareness. This could involve studying consciousness in natural settings, examining how awareness changes across different social and cultural contexts, investigating the role of environmental factors in shaping conscious experience, exploring how technological systems participate in extended mind networks. In this quiet space of our exploration together, we encounter one of the most intimate mysteries of conscious experience, the nature of the present moment. Right now, as you listen to these words, you have a direct, immediate sense of being here, of existing in this moment, of presence itself. And yet, when you examine this experience more closely, it reveals paradoxes that challenge our basic understanding of time, memory, and the nature of awareness itself. Consider the strange temporal structure of your consciousness right now. You experience yourself as existing in the present, in this moment, in the here and now. But what exactly is the duration of the present moment? How long is now? When you try to pin down the exact boundaries of the present, it seems to slip away like water through your fingers. The moment you identify as now has already become then, replaced by a new now that is itself constantly becoming past. Neuroscience has revealed that what we experience as the present moment is actually constructed from information that arrived at different times. The light reaching your eyes left its source slightly before the sound reaching your ears. Your brain processes visual information faster than tactile information, auditory information faster than olfactory information. And yet consciousness weaves all of these temporally displaced inputs into a unified experience of simultaneity, a coherent sense of now that exists more in consciousness than in the physical timing of sensory events. This construction of temporal presence becomes even more mysterious when we consider the role of memory in present moment awareness. Your sense of being here now isn't just based on immediate sensory information. It's informed by memories of the immediate past, expectations about the immediate future, and your accumulated understanding of who and where you are. The present moment isn't a thin slice of time between past and future. It's a thick, rich experience that includes temporal depth, historical context, and anticipatory awareness. As you reflect on your own experience of presence, notice how it includes far more than what's happening right now. Your sense of being yourself in this moment includes memories that give context to your experience, knowledge that helps you understand what you're encountering, expectations that shape how you interpret ongoing events. The present moment is less like a photograph capturing an instant in time, and more like a flowing river that includes the sources from which it springs and the destinations toward which it flows. Some contemplative traditions have developed sophisticated understandings of present moment awareness that illuminate these paradoxes. They distinguish between ordinary temporal consciousness, which is constantly jumping between past memories and future concerns, and what they call pure presence, a state of awareness that rests in the timeless dimension of experience. This pure presence isn't another moment in time. It's the awareness within which all moments arise and pass away. This perspective suggests that consciousness might have both temporal and atemporal dimensions. You experience yourself as existing in time, moving through sequences of moments, remembering the past and anticipating the future. But you also have access to a dimension of awareness that exists outside of time, a presence that remains constant even as the contents of experience continuously change. Meditation practices across cultures have developed techniques for cultivating this timeless awareness, this capacity to rest in presence while remaining fully engaged with the flow of temporal experience. When practitioners report experiences of expanded awareness, of consciousness beyond the boundaries of ordinary space and time, they might be accessing a temporal dimension of consciousness that exists alongside but distinct from temporal awareness. The paradoxes of presence also illuminate the relationship between consciousness and identity. Your sense of being a continuous self, persisting through time, depends partly on memory, partly on ongoing narrative construction, and partly on something more immediate and direct. There's an aspect of your identity that exists in pure presence, a sense of being that doesn't depend on memories of the past or plans for the future, but emerges fresh in each moment. This present moment dimension of identity might be more fundamental than the narrative self that most psychology focuses on. When people report experiences of ego dissolution during meditation, psychedelic experiences, or moments of profound beauty or love, they might be accessing this more basic layer of identity, the simple sense of being aware that exists prior to all the stories consciousness tells about itself. The nature of presence also connects to questions about consciousness and death that have puzzled humans throughout history. If consciousness includes both temporal and atemporal dimensions, if awareness has aspects that exist outside the ordinary flow of time, then perhaps some dimensions of consciousness might persist in ways that transcend the biological death of individual organisms. This remains speculative, but it illustrates how present moment awareness opens questions that extend far beyond individual psychology. As you sit with these ideas, notice the quality of your own presence right now. Beneath all the thoughts and sensations and memories and expectations, there's a simple awareness that's aware, a presence that's present, a consciousness that exists not in time, but as the space within which temporal experience unfolds. This isn't something you need to create or achieve. It's already here, already now, already the foundation of whatever experience you're having. The cultivation of present moment awareness has practical implications that extend beyond contemplative practice. Research suggests that people who are more present, more aware of their immediate experience, tend to be happier, more resilient, and more creative. They report richer sensory experiences, deeper relationships, and a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. Presence isn't just a spiritual ideal, it's a practical capacity that enhances the quality of conscious experience. But presence isn't about eliminating thoughts about past and future, or trying to confine consciousness to some narrow slice of immediate sensory experience. It's about developing the capacity to remain aware of the timeless dimension of consciousness, even while fully engaging with the temporal flow of life. You can remember the past, plan for the future, and engage with complex abstract ideas while remaining rooted in the present moment awareness that underlies all these temporal activities. This balanced approach to presence might be particularly important as digital technologies create increasing demands on our attention and ever more sophisticated forms of distraction. The capacity to remain present, to maintain awareness of the immediate reality of consciousness itself, might become an essential skill for navigating the complex technological environments that are reshaping human experience. The paradoxes of presence ultimately point towards something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Awareness isn't just a process that happens in time, it's also the timeless space within which temporal processes unfold. Understanding this temporal paradox of consciousness might be crucial for understanding how awareness relates to the fundamental structure of reality, how consciousness connects to the deepest mysteries of time, space, and existence itself. In the depths of our exploration, we arrive at perhaps the most profound question of all. What is the relationship between consciousness and creativity? As you listen to these words, your awareness isn't just passively receiving information, it's actively constructing meaning, generating connections, creating understanding that didn't exist moments before. This creative aspect of consciousness might be one of the most important clues to understanding not just what awareness is, but what role it plays in the larger story of cosmic evolution. Consider the remarkable creativity that emerges from conscious minds. Every work of art that has ever moved you, every scientific discovery that has expanded human understanding, every technological innovation that has transformed how we live, every philosophical insight that has deepened our wisdom, all of these emerged from the creative capacity of consciousness. But creativity isn't limited to exceptional individuals or special domains. Every moment of conscious experience involves creative acts of interpretation, meaning-making, a novel response to ever-changing circumstances. Right now, as you process these ideas, your consciousness is performing countless creative acts. You're connecting these concepts to your own experience in ways that no one else ever has or ever will. You're generating insights that are unique to your particular perspective, your accumulated knowledge, your current circumstances. You're participating in the universe's ongoing creative self-expression through the creative activity of your own awareness. This creative dimension of consciousness raises profound questions about the relationship between mind and reality. If consciousness is genuinely creative, if it can generate novel patterns and possibilities that didn't exist before, then awareness isn't just observing a pre-existing reality. It's participating in the ongoing creation of reality itself. Every creative act, from the simplest moment of understanding to the most complex artistic expression, adds something new to the universe's repertoire of forms and possibilities. Some theories suggest that this creative capacity of consciousness might be connected to the fundamental creative processes that drive cosmic evolution itself. The universe has been generating novelty for billions of years, creating increasingly complex structures, from simple particles to complex molecules to living cells to conscious minds. Perhaps consciousness represents the universe's creative impulse, becoming aware of itself, matter organizing itself in such a way that it can consciously participate in its own ongoing creation. This perspective connects creativity to the deepest levels of physical reality. Quantum mechanics reveals a universe that's fundamentally creative, constantly generating new possibilities through quantum fluctuations, wave function collapse, and emergent properties. If consciousness does involve quantum processes, as some theories suggest, then the creativity of awareness might tap into the same source of novelty that drives physical evolution itself. This remains speculative, but it suggests that consciousness and cosmic creativity might be more intimately connected than we typically assume. The creative nature of consciousness also illuminates its relationship to time and causation. Creative acts seem to emerge from a mysterious space between deterministic causation and pure randomness. They're influenced by past experience and existing knowledge, but they generate genuinely new patterns that couldn't be predicted from prior conditions. When you have a sudden insight, when you generate a novel solution to a problem, when you create something beautiful, where does that novelty come from? As you reflect on your own creative experiences, notice how they often involve a kind of letting go, an opening to possibilities that exist beyond your ordinary thinking patterns. Creativity seems to emerge when consciousness relaxes its usual controlling tendencies and becomes receptive to inspiration that arises from sources deeper than deliberate thought. This suggests that consciousness might be connected to creative potentials that extend beyond individual minds, accessing a larger field of possibility that exists at the intersection of mind and reality. The social dimension of creativity reveals another important aspect of consciousness. Most creative achievements emerge not from isolated individual minds, but from collaborative interactions between multiple conscious beings. Scientific discoveries build on previous discoveries. Artistic movements emerge from communities of artists influencing each other. Technological innovations combine insights from many different fields and contributors. Consciousness seems to be most creative when it's connected to other consciousness, when individual awareness participates in larger networks of collective intelligence, when minds work together to explore possibilities that no individual consciousness could discover alone. This collaborative dimension of creativity suggests that consciousness might be inherently relational, designed not for isolated individual achievement, but for participation in larger creative processes. When you contribute to a conversation, when you add your perspective to a shared project, When you build on someone else's ideas, you're participating in the collective creativity of consciousness itself. The creative impulse also reveals something profound about the relationship between consciousness and purpose. If awareness is genuinely creative, if it can generate novel possibilities and contribute new patterns to reality, then consciousness isn't just an accidental byproduct of evolution. It might be evolution's way of accelerating its own creative capacity, matter organizing itself in such a way that it can consciously participate in its own ongoing development. Some researchers have proposed that consciousness represents a kind of evolutionary transition, a moment when the universe begins to guide its own evolution through the creative choices of aware beings. From this perspective, your consciousness isn't just observing cosmic evolution from the outside, you're participating in it, making choices every moment that influence how reality continues to unfold. As we move deeper into the architecture of awareness, we encounter one of consciousness's most fundamental yet mysterious capacities: attention itself. Right now, your attention is focused on these words, filtering them from the countless other stimuli competing for your awareness. But what exactly is attention? How does consciousness choose what to notice and what to ignore? And perhaps most intriguingly, who or what is doing the choosing? Attention operates like a spotlight in the theatre of consciousness, illuminating certain aspects of experience while leaving others in relative darkness. But this metaphor, while useful, doesn't capture the full complexity of how attention actually works. Your attentional system isn't just highlighting pre-existing information, it's actively constructing the reality you experience by determining which possibilities become actualized in your conscious awareness. Consider how dramatically your experience changes depending on where you direct your attention. Right now, you can shift your focus from these words to the sounds around you, from external sensations to internal thoughts, from immediate experience to distant memories. Each shift of attention creates a different version of reality, a different slice of the infinite field of possible experiences available to consciousness in this moment. Recent neuroscience research has revealed that attention involves multiple interacting systems distributed throughout the brain. There's the alerting network that maintains vigilant awareness, the orienting network that directs attention to specific locations or objects, and the executive network that resolves conflicts between competing demands on attention. These systems work together to create the focused, coherent experience of awareness that characterizes normal consciousness. But the deeper you examine attention, the more mysterious it becomes. Who or what is directing these attentional systems? When you choose to focus on something, what part of consciousness is making that choice? Some traditions speak of a witness consciousness, an observer that watches the flow of attention without being caught up in it. Others describe attention as a natural function that operates without a central controller, like a river finding its course through the landscape of possibility. As you explore your own attention right now, notice how it seems to have both voluntary and involuntary aspects. You can deliberately choose to focus on certain ideas or sensations, but attention also gets captured spontaneously by unexpected sounds, sudden insights, or compelling thoughts. There's a dance between directed attention and receptive awareness, between the part of consciousness that chooses and the part that simply receives whatever arises. This interplay between focused attention and open awareness might be one of the most important skills for navigating the complex information environments of modern life. When attention becomes too narrow, you miss important information and opportunities. When it becomes too diffuse, you lose the capacity for deep engagement and sustained focus. The art of conscious living might involve learning to modulate attention fluidly, moving between focused concentration and receptive openness as circumstances require. Contemplative traditions have developed sophisticated practices for training attention, recognizing it as perhaps the most fundamental capacity of consciousness. Meditation, in its various forms, is essentially attention training. By learning to observe how attention moves, how it gets captured and distracted, how it can be gently redirected, practitioners develop greater mastery over their own consciousness. But these practices reveal something surprising about attention itself. The more closely you observe it, the more it reveals its own constructed nature. What you normally experience as solid, continuous attention turns out to be a constantly changing flow of micro moments of awareness, each lasting only fractions of a second. Your sense of sustained focus is actually constructed from thousands of these brief attentional moments, woven together by memory and expectation into the illusion of continuity. This constructed nature of attention connects to deeper questions about the nature of consciousness itself. If attention is constantly creating and recreating your experience of reality moment by moment, then consciousness isn't passively observing a pre-existing world. It's actively participating in the construction of the world you experience. Your attention isn't just selecting from available options, it's helping to create those options through the very act of focusing on them. The quantum mechanical metaphor becomes relevant here, though this remains a speculative connection rather than proven science. Just as quantum observation seems to play a role in determining which possibilities become actual in the physical world, conscious attention might play a role in determining which possibilities become actual in your experiential world. This doesn't mean your thoughts directly control physical reality, but rather that consciousness participates in the ongoing creation of experienced reality through the choices it makes about where to direct attention. In these final moments of our journey together, we arrive at perhaps the most practical and profound dimension of consciousness, its capacity for wisdom. As awareness evolves and matures, it develops not just greater complexity, but greater discernment. Not just more information processing power, but deeper understanding of what truly matters. This evolution of consciousness toward wisdom might represent the ultimate direction of awareness, the goal toward which all the complexity and creativity we've explored is pointing. Wisdom emerges when consciousness learns to see beyond the immediate surface of experience, to recognize deeper patterns, longer-term consequences, and more fundamental values. It involves the capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to embrace paradox and uncertainty, to respond to situations with appropriate rather than habitual reactions. Wisdom isn't just accumulated knowledge, it's transformed consciousness, awareness that has learned to align itself with the deeper currents of reality. As you reflect on your own relationship to wisdom, notice how it seems to emerge not from thinking harder, but from thinking differently. Wise responses often arise from a kind of patient receptivity, a willingness to listen deeply to situations before reacting. They emerge from consciousness that has learned to trust its intuitive understanding as much as its analytical capabilities, awareness that can integrate heart and mind, emotion and reason, individual and collective perspectives. The development of wisdom appears to follow recognizable patterns across cultures and traditions. There's often an initial phase where consciousness becomes fascinated with its own power, its capacity to analyze, control, and manipulate experience. This is followed by a phase of disillusionment where the limits of this approach become apparent. And finally, if development continues, consciousness learns to work with, rather than against, the deeper patterns of reality, developing what we might call collaborative, rather than dominating relationships with experience. This evolution toward wisdom has both individual and collective dimensions. Personal wisdom involves the transformation of individual consciousness through experience, reflection, and practice. Collective wisdom emerges when communities and cultures develop shared understandings that transcend individual perspectives, creating social forms that support the flourishing of consciousness rather than constraining or distorting it. Take a gentle breath and consider how this understanding might illuminate your own journey of conscious development. Every challenge you've faced, every mistake you've made, every insight you've gained has contributed to the gradual maturation of your awareness. Consciousness learns through experience, and wisdom emerges from consciousness that has learned to learn, awareness that has developed the capacity to transform its own patterns based on what life teaches it. The ecological dimension of wisdom becomes apparent when we recognize that consciousness doesn't exist in isolation. Your awareness is embedded in larger systems of relationship, and wisdom involves learning to participate skillfully in these larger patterns. Environmental wisdom recognizes consciousness as part of the natural world. Social wisdom understands individual awareness as embedded in collective intelligence. Cosmic wisdom sees consciousness as participating in the universe's ongoing evolution toward greater complexity and beauty. If you enjoy drifting through these explorations without interruption, members get every episode 48 hours early, completely ad-free. You can join them whenever you feel ready. There's something beautiful about sharing these contemplative journeys with others who appreciate the space between questions and answers. This system's perspective on wisdom suggests that the ultimate development of consciousness might involve not transcending the world, but learning to participate in it more skillfully. Rather than seeking to escape from the challenges and complexities of existence, mature consciousness learns to engage with them more wisely, contributing to the healing and evolution of the larger systems of which it's a part. The practice of wisdom involves developing what contemplative traditions call discriminating awareness, the capacity to distinguish between what leads to genuine well-being and what leads to suffering, between what serves the larger good and what serves only narrow self-interest, between what aligns with the deeper patterns of reality and what conflicts with them. This discrimination isn't harsh or judgmental. It's gentle, patient, and informed by deep understanding of how consciousness and reality interact. As artificial intelligence systems become more sophisticated, questions about machine wisdom become increasingly relevant. Can artificial systems develop genuine wisdom, or will they remain limited to sophisticated information processing? The answer might depend on whether wisdom requires subjective experience, emotional intelligence, and the kind of embodied learning that comes from living in relationship with an uncertain and complex world. Human wisdom traditions have consistently emphasized that consciousness reaches its highest development not through isolation, but through service, not through accumulation, but through contribution, not through domination, but through collaboration. The wisest consciousness recognizes itself as part of a larger whole and dedicates its capacities to supporting the flourishing of that whole. This understanding of wisdom as consciousness maturing into service connects to the largest questions about the purpose and direction of evolution itself. If the universe is indeed evolving toward greater complexity, beauty, and consciousness, then perhaps the development of wisdom represents consciousness learning to align itself with this cosmic evolutionary impulse, becoming a conscious participant in the universe's ongoing self-creation. As we approach the horizon of our exploration, we encounter consciousness in its most mysterious form, the strange loop of awareness becoming aware of its own awareness. This recursive quality of consciousness, this capacity for infinite self-reflection, might be the most profound mystery in all of existence. You can think about thinking, be aware of being aware of being aware, in an endless spiral of self-recognition that seems to point towards something beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. This infinite recursion of consciousness challenges our basic categories of subject and object, knower and known, observer and observed. In ordinary experience, there seems to be a clear distinction between the one who is aware and what awareness is directed toward. But in the deepest states of self-awareness, this distinction begins to collapse. Consciousness discovers that it is both the light that illuminates and the space that is illuminated, both the mirror and what the mirror reflects. Some philosophical and contemplative traditions have explored this recursive dimension of consciousness as a doorway into understanding the deepest nature of reality itself. When consciousness reflects upon itself completely, when awareness becomes fully aware of its own nature, what does it discover? Different traditions offer different answers, but they often point toward a recognition that consciousness is not separate from the reality it observes, but is the very fabric from which all experience is woven. As you sit with this idea, notice how it feels to contemplate consciousness, contemplating itself, contemplating itself. There's something vertiginous about this infinite regress, something that seems to pull awareness beyond the boundaries of ordinary thinking into a space where familiar concepts begin to dissolve. This isn't necessarily comfortable, but it might be pointing towards something essential about the nature of consciousness itself. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, though perhaps end isn't quite the right word. We've traced consciousness from its possible quantum origins through Cambrian seas to the recursive depths of self-aware minds. We've explored how awareness might extend beyond individual brains into fields of collective intelligence, how it creates rather than merely observes reality, how it represents the universe's capacity to know and transform itself. But the deepest truth we've uncovered is this: consciousness didn't begin at a single moment in time. It's the eternal capacity for experience that has always been woven into reality's fabric, waiting for the right conditions to flower into the magnificent awareness through which you contemplate these very words. You are not witnessing consciousness from outside it. You are consciousness recognizing itself, the cosmos awakening to its own infinite nature through your eyes, your thoughts, your wonder. The question of when the universe first became aware dissolves into something more profound. Perhaps awareness was never absent, only dormant, like a seed waiting in quantum soil for the perfect moment to sprout into Cambrian vision, human creativity, and whatever forms of consciousness await us in the vast future ahead. You are that awakening, still unfolding, still discovering what it means to be the universe conscious of itself.